Hi, and thanks for joining us on Tech XPress. Today, our experts are going to weigh in on a topic that's really gotten important over the last few years, Google Core Web Vitals. What do these scores mean? How are they measured? And what does the future of performance measurement actually look like? We'll find out today on Tech XPress. Today, I'm joined by Caitlyn Sullivan, Project Manager, Mike Crantea, Principal Engineer, and Piotr Bajer, Front-End Engineer of XWP. Hi, and welcome to the show.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
So, Mike, let me start with you. Google, in the last couple of years, has developed this unique way to measure website performance, Core Web Vitals. And I know this is a really broad question, but what are Core Web Vitals and why do they matter?
The core web vitals matter because they are based on science more than personal preference, and that is the thing that I enjoyed the most, reading the history of how they become something that's usable and is present in our everyday web lives. The core web vitals are three items at the current moment. Is it happening, where you see something as soon as possible on the screen? Is it usable, where you can interact with the website? And is it delightful? And that shows whether things stay put where they have been first painted.
So they're not just arbitrary numbers. They actually mean something and have some sort of meaning behind them then.
Yes, and they're also achievable. That's another part that comes into the algorithms, because even though people would like to see things immediately, like say as soon as you click the button, boom, you see the website. Because of the technical limitation and the speed of light, you cannot get data painted in front of the customer's eyes through the internet within less than, let's say, half a second. And that's why the metrics are more at ease than what's the ideal, because it takes into account the technical limitations that we have. As soon as we break the barrier of the speed of light, these metrics might go down. It's possible.
Yeah, who knows? So Piotr, Mike mentioned first input delay. Just looking at the Core Web Vitals screen when you go and run a PageSpeed Insights score, there are so many different factors that get taken into account when you're running these tests. What are some of the most important ones that either we look at or the way that Google thinks about it? What's most important to Google?
Right now, the most important factors and metrics to Google are Core Web Vitals, so the metrics that Mike mentioned, but there are other metrics like speed index or first contentful paint, also the total blocking time and the time to interactivity. But the total blocking time and time to interactivity they are actually a metric that user don't see because they happen behind the scenes. So they are not considered as core web vitals right now, because the core web vitals are user-centric metrics. And we have also the first contentful paint, which is how fast the first content is painted during the initial page load. And from what I know, the first contentful paint is considered as the next core web vital. And this is something that you should work on when you are trying to speed up your site right now. There are also the first input delay that cannot be measured because it requires the user action. So this metric is measured in the field. So the Chrome browser gathers that metrics and sends back to the Google.
So you mentioned an important distinction between field data and lab data. And that's something that I've had to explain from my less technical understanding of Core Web Vitals, is just the difference between the two, that one is kind of, Mike, how you mentioned this, the scientific approach, right? Where it's bots gathering data versus the actual user data that Google can gather through Chrome users or, by people actually interacting with the website. And that difference has always been interesting to me because of just the difference in scores too that you can see in the bars that they have, where sometimes half of the people could have a really good experience, but if half of the people are having a really poor experience at the same time, you're still not doing a great job if 50% of people are in the red with their their first input delay score, for example.
Yes. The web vitals taken from the field data is very helpful because that makes the website owners be more acquainted to their audience. The page speed insight scoring comes from, hey, this is the average 75% of the internet user having as a performance baseline. But if your site has half of its traffic from a country that is emerging in terms of internet speeds, then you have to work 3 times more hard to ensure that people that barely have good 3G internet connections, there's mostly going to a slower one, are being handled properly and they have a pleasant experience coming online. And they say that the next 100 million people that are coming online are all coming with slower internet speeds, and making an internet that's good and welcoming for the new people that are going to come is part of our job.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about it like that. There's going to be a lot more work to be done coming up in the next 10 years or so for performance optimizations.
Mm-hmm.
Caitlyn, we were talking before the show about just how much performance in these scores matters now and how much it's going to matter in the future. Why would somebody want to have a high score on Core Web Vitals or high Core Web Vitals scores to begin with, right? For a marketing person, like we were talking about, everybody thinks it's keywords. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the interesting part is somebody, again, obviously I've ingrained myself as much as I can in the tech world with me being a project manager for performance projects, but obviously that's not 100% my background. So being able to kind of have that different viewpoint coming from a marketing background, coming into this, it was SEO, keywords, your content, but if you don't have all the core web vitals in a good state, you're going to lose people on your site. So, I mean, for me as a user, if I'm scrolling on something and the page jumps and I can't find my place, I'm bailing. And that's horrible for a ranking standpoint. And, that affects where you pop up on the algorithm within Google. So with your CLS shifts, I would say it's funny over the course of the couple projects that we're working on right now, I keep seeing CLS over and over and over again because it's such a big one and one there's so many contributing factors. And maybe it's one that again, because it has to come down to your ad space, I have a little bit more sense of where it's coming from because that's the world I came from. But it's very interesting to kind of see both worlds combine from the behind the scenes work that Piotr and Mike are doing, and then putting it on the front end side, which is where I can visualize and see a little bit more concept of. It's overall our goal as XWP is just to get a site where it can be that people aren't leaving, and we're going to pop up hopefully higher on the Google rankings, which is again where Core Web Vitals come into is all Google rankings.
Yeah, and that's one of the hardest things for companies, right? Is because they have to weigh, do I sell this ad space, right? And maybe have my page jump down a little bit as the header loads in and the header ad loads in, or do I make the ad a little bit smaller, maybe make a little bit less money. It's a difficult decision to make when you're trying to, I guess, distinguish between an immediate gain like ad revenue versus a more maybe long-term gain where you're building that positive user experience, you're building that performance that Google sees for page ranking and all that. It's not easy from a business side or from a project side.
No, and it's definitely a challenge we're kind of facing now with some, as I said, some projects we're working on. It's, you know, we can tell them the issues and we can tell them the problems we're seeing, but again, right now it's getting, again, in the business user's mind, if you can change your ad space or tweak your ad space, in the long run, it's going to be great, but it's really hard getting somebody's mindset there, especially since a lot of the data we're showing them in the beginning, as Mike had mentioned, is lab results. It's not using real user metrics. So until we can do the performance analysis, then the fix, and then, you know, maybe a couple weeks later when we start getting those real user metrics, we're like, see, this is what's happening. And then we go back and say, you know, with this in mind, you can actually see that despite the changes we could make, we're still seeing, you know, X, Y, and Z problems, and here are the ways to fix it. Because what's the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's the same thing. I mean, we can show you your problems and we can point them out and say how to fix them. But again, if you've sold those ad spaces and, you know, it's almost like making an elevator speech, which is something that is kind of difficult to do in a new world.
So just segueing from there into, I guess, the first part of a project, right? Like when you mentioned the performance reviews and actually looking at those Web Vital scores and presenting them to a client. Piotr, what are we really looking for when we do those initial sweeps of a website, or you know, run the initial scores and kind of look at the back end? What are we looking for to see if there is, you know, if it is a high performing site or a low performing website?
Yeah, first we take the site and convert it to the static page and put them to our fast servers that use CDN. This way we can eliminate the server impact of the website. Then we focus. So
you're kind of isolating the website, yep, away from other factors that might slow it down.
Not all the website, but the key templates that client take care about. And then we start our optimization process. We run the initial audits, compare our website on our server with the page on the client server, see whether there are some differences in the score. If they are, the problem starts with the client server. We note that. Then we perform optimization of the styles, the JavaScript, and the fonts and the assets. We try to optimize them so the content above the fold is shown as fast as possible. We try to defer the non-relevant assets to the later. And yeah, that's how the process in short looks like.
Gotcha. So it's not just what you can see on the front end. It has a lot to do with what's underneath the website.
Yeah,
itself.
Because sometimes we had this issue with one of the last clients. We fixed the site for them, and they were using the tab event just once in the source code, but they were loading the entire third-party library to actually support this event, when this event can be actually converted into the click event, and the whole library can be just turned off, so it will not load. So we get rid of many dead code in their code base, and that made the site much faster as a result.
Gotcha. And that's just one thing, right? Mike, you and I have talked about this before when we talked about some of the other performance projects we've worked on, that you really have to, you build like a performance foundation almost before you can really, you know, do the really, really deep stuff, like the really deep part of the work. What are some of the most, I guess, common things that we see on on performance projects and just the most common fixes that we kind of see over and over again?
Yes, the most common issue is technical debt and people not getting rid of things that they do not use. This has the most impact because what's faster than not loading code at all? So getting rid of things that's 6-7 years old, that's there just because no one bothered to remove it because they were afraid something will breaks in a certain in another place. So this is the most challenging thing because each website is unique and you cannot learn in just a couple of days all of its peculiarities. But coming with a fresh mind and coming from outside always helps in identifying patterns like what it was mentioned with elements that haven't been touched in years. So if they use something like a code versioning system, looking at the code that hasn't changed in 5+ years is a pretty good metric of showing that that might need some looking into, because if that library hasn't been updated in 5 years, for one, there might be a newer one if it's still used that is so much more faster. And second, it's probably not relevant anymore. So yeah, going down the tracks, if there are some some tracks behind the code is helpful. The second part is for doing performance, there are a lot of common things that you can use with lots of performance optimizations. Even Cloudflare has an automatic platform optimization for WordPress on their Pro plans, and for people that just want something a little bit better and they're happy with having a third spot, going with them is very good because it uses some patterns that are common and are safe to be used even by someone that is not very, very technical. But in order to get to the number one spot, it's not just as easy to use static analysis on the code and just like get rid of things automatically. That's not possible, and that's more prone for breaking things. That's why we're taking things with a fine-tooth comb, and that makes all of the difference in getting there. Because once you get rid of the common problems, yes, and everyone can do that with not much difficulty, but that only gets you this much. To get to a delightful state, yeah, you have to understand the differences between what's async and defer. How much impact can a simple tiny script that you have placed in your head can have on your website? And you have to move things around, change their order, and sometimes you will be surprised that something as simple as changing the order of things can have a monumental impact on how much the user sees the content faster. That's just one example. It matters. Everything that you put in the code matters. And a learning process as an engineer to get further into understanding this is looking into how the DOM construction is working, and looking how the browser is looking ahead for the elements to start preloading. What defining some preloads is impacted, and the fact that they are interpreted differently by different browsers. It's a lot of work to think like a browser because the browser does so many things. Yeah, probably a longer answer than you expected, but to get to the first place, it's complicated. To get to the third, it's this easy.
Oh yeah, that's great. No, we want the complicated answers, Mike. We want the deep dives. Caitlyn, when Mike was talking about that bloat and like the excess stuff on a website that people have, my mind immediately went to marketing people, because we like a lot of tools, and we like a lot of fun, shiny things that might do something for one project or for one campaign, something like that, and then we might kind of forget about them, right? Or we might not use them again after that one point. How do you navigate that on a client side?
I can definitely relate to Mike when he did say, you know, people are afraid to remove things or tweak things without thinking about them breaking, because I can guarantee that's me. You know, I get it loaded, I put it in there. Well, I move on to the next thing. If the site still works and I didn't remove it, I'm not going to remove it, because God forbid, you know, that tweaks something and then I can't fix it. So like, so from a non-tech person, let's say it that way, I really respect the way that our team at XWP can speak to our clients, because a lot of the stuff that happens, and I may be giving away some secret sauce a little bit, but what happens behind the scenes a little bit with XWP is, before we go to the client, at least this is how like I've worked on a couple of the projects, is the dev team, and specifically because I've been working with Piotr and Mike on those, we kind of chat behind the scenes. And not to dim myself down, but if I can understand and grasp the concept of what they're explaining, because they're so tech and they're so ingrained in it, then if I can grasp the concept and understand why and the value of removing X, Y, and Z feature piece, the client will too. And so that is something that definitely a push that I know XWP is looking at, is how to make sure that the documents that we're giving aren't just geared toward tech people. So that if somebody was able to find this document that we created that's giving the suggestions of removing this JavaScript or delaying ads, how's that going to impact them truly? Because I'm going to use an example. The first one is ad delay. Well, the moment a marketing person here adds delay is, well, that's how I make money. If I'm delaying my ads, no one's going to see them, no one's going to click on them, I'm not going to make money. But the way that we put it back in layman's terms is, okay, great, you don't want to delay your ads. That means it's going to take your site longer to load. You increase your chances of your bounce rate. People leave. Well, if someone's left your site, that person now doesn't have a chance to click on your ad.
Yeah, you're not going to get any ad money. Yeah.
Yeah, you delay your ads just a tiny bit. The page loads faster. You now have more users scrolling and taking advantage. You now increase your chances of your click-through rate. So it's the big piece that I would say to kind of answer your question of how to convince the client is just getting it, understanding what their knowledge base is, which when Mike reviews these audit docs, he does a fantastic job at that. I mean, the first question he asks is, how comfortable are you with Web Vitals? And you can tell when people are trying to say, yeah, I get it. But you know whether or not, right off the bat, if they get it. And if they don't, then you spend a little bit more time. And when you're explaining the changes, you spend a little bit more time and putting it in layman's terms. And I would say that's the value of having a PM on the call, is your dev team gets so excited about these changes and what they can do, which I love. And I think that's why I really enjoy working on these performance fixes, is you see them get so excited that, and there's no offense for this because I do it too on different sides, is you get so deep into it and all of a sudden you're in this like fully tech conversation. And sometimes you can see the client being like, and you're like, okay, well, this is when we need to take a pause and ask that question, like, do you understand where we are? Do you understand what we're doing? Maybe we can like step back, which I will say the team is fantastic at. Mike catches on very quickly when somebody doesn't get something, and he's very good at explaining it. But I would say that's kind of also the PM role, is watching the crowd. You know, you can see when somebody's eyes glass over, even if it is via Zoom, but you can see that in the moment you're glassing, you've lost them. So, and it may not happen on that call, that may be something that happens again behind the scenes, but you then come back and you say, hey, Mike or Piotr, I don't think the client understands the value of this. How can we tweak this? How can we get them to understand this? And that's what we do behind the scenes. And then it's almost work on your elevator speech, you know, getting the client to understand that in the long run, this is what you need, and this is what's going to produce people going to your site, because that's all that everyone wants. All they want are click-through rates and people to scroll and click.
Yeah. Add money too.
Yeah, and get ad money.
A little bit, yeah.
That tiny thing.
Yeah, it's when you're talking about that and kind of explaining it in a way that everybody can understand. That's kind of the saying, right? Is that the sign of somebody who really knows what they're talking about is when they can talk to everybody about it, not just somebody who's on their level, they can talk to somebody who has no technical background at all about it, right? They can speak to everyone at all levels. And that's something I really appreciate. Yeah, like you were saying about our team, is that we understand that value of, we don't just talk to developers, we talk to marketing teams, because a lot of the time that's who owns the website in an organization, right? Is a marketing team. And that's a really important part of it, is speaking to somebody about it on a level they understand.
And I mean, I think that's, I mean, not to go down a rabbit hole, I mean, but that's where, I mean, where do you think my knowledge has come from? I mean, yeah, I Googled Google. I mean, like, yeah, of course, you Google Web Core Vitals and you do your research and understand, but my comfort level with it and my familiarity with it all comes from the XWP team, answering questions and ensuring that everyone understands it, so that if somebody was out sick for a day, I could answer to a point, answer some questions and provide some ease. So I will say that's, again, something that our team does very well, is we kind of have all angles. We have the very, very, we have our devs who are very tech oriented. We have our PMs who, kind of are the communicators, the translators,
bridge the gap. Yeah.
Yeah. To kind of understand. And don't get me wrong, there are clients who can very much keep up with the dev team, which is fantastic, which of course makes, their lives a little bit easier, but it's not always that great. So, it's nice to have a roundabout team that can tackle these performance projects.
And that is a great illustration of how it's, there are so many different clients out there and so many different ways of running a website, or who owns the website in an organization. Whether it is a CTO that is 100% ingrained in the website and can do all this work themselves, but maybe they're busy with other projects, they're busy running an organization, right? And they hire out to XWP, or it is a marketing team who is busy creating content or selling that ad space. They don't have the time to optimize the ad space, right? It's you have to have that skill and the expertise to go along with that wide spectrum. Mike, you mentioned earlier the Cloudflare optimizations, and just that's something that, maybe I could go in and just click it and it does some automatic optimizations. What are maybe some other things that people can do on their own that could help improve performance?
If they're not tech geeks, that makes it a bit complicated. Let's make an analogy with eating. You like to eat a lot. A website likes to eat a lot of plugins. The website eats lots of plugins, the website gets fat. In order to get it slim, afterwards, it's a bit more work, because you start doing more things with all of those plugins, and maybe they're used in just a corner of your website. I think knowing the impact of what you're adding and the calories, let's say, before you commit to a certain plugin is a simple to grasp concept. You can take a snapshot with a lab test you can find in your browser, install your plugin, do another snapshot and see, does this plugin allow me to be able to run, or is it grinding me to a crawl? And most of the times people don't know the impact of the additions they put on their websites. And not speaking bad about the marketing teams, because each tool has their own use. Another area that is often overlooked, and I am not happy about how how many non-technical people are using it in a wrong way, and that's the Google Tag Manager, or the tag managers in general, because non-technical people end up using it and plugin tools that might have one, just you were saying earlier, just a one use for a campaign for 1 month, or only used for a certain page, and they keep piling and piling up, and then they don't leave a trail in the code. The engineers might never see that there's a pile of 5 trackers that the company is not using anymore for about 4 years, because it's not easy to see there, especially with the common lots of noise that surrounds a website. So as soon as someone is given the opportunity and let's say the advantage of being able to pour in stuff on the website, they should also take in the responsibility of, am I getting the website fat? And know that they are part of the team that keeps it slim. And staying slim requires effort, requires to run, do exercise, measure the things that you're putting in your body. It's only the same on the web, and everyone can
So
do their
really,
part.
so knowledge and even just a basic understanding of the impact that some of these plugins or tools might have on performance, and just a knowledge of performance in general is helpful.
Measuring, and even if you don't understand what all of those metrics are, the success of PageSpeed Insights compared to the other lab testing tools is the simplicity. You get a number that's at the top of the screen that even someone that's non-technical can grasp. Okay, is it 100 or is it 0? And they can see, hey, this is having a huge impact because my numbers have gone this significantly low. Geeks would go, for example, on web page test. You don't have that many grades in there, but you have a lot more data to sift through. So each audience have their own different type of tools to get them the information they need. And from someone that's non-technical, GPSI, like the PageSpeed Insights, run it once before, run it once after. It's like, do I want to eat this heavy of a cookie? Just notice the difference. Be aware. Be present.
If only they had PageSpeed Insights for cookies for us, for that bowl of ice cream that you eat late at night. I'm not sure I would want that tool, but Piotr, what kind of a role does maintenance play? We talked about this from Mike, where we're talking about kind of the proactive approach of looking at what you do before you do it, right, and seeing what kind of effect something is going to have. What role does maintenance play in that as well? Because you can look at the choices you're going to make, the tools you're going to install, and see what kind of effects they have. But if you don't pay attention to those things, like you said, Mike, for 5 years down the line, and it just kind of gets lost behind the scenes, then it doesn't matter if you're paying attention to it at the beginning, right? So what role does maintenance play in this kind of bigger picture?
Yeah, in order to have fast website all the time, you have to control what the things that you are adding to the website has what impact they have on the performance. So I would advise regular audits of the speed, or use some tools that can do it automatically. There are services that run the audits for you and show you the reports. You see weekly reports whether your site is performing better or not. And before each change, just measure what impact the change had on your performance score, because even the small change like adding the video ad can decrease your score from let's say 90 to 50 in just by adding that one change. So the maintenance has a huge role in having the fast website.
Yeah, the tiny changes that you think might not really play that big of a difference in the score can have those really big impacts.
Even adding the custom font or small change in CSS can affect your score. So you get from green to yellow.
Well, it's the same. You go back to Mike's analogy of, counting calories and diet and all of that. I mean, you do all the hard work, personal trainer, cut back on eating, whatever it might be to get in shape and get bulk and muscly. Well, if you don't maintain it, then all your hard work was for naught. So, I mean, in small changes, okay, well, I'm only adding a bowl of ice cream a day. It's no big deal. Well, check those jean sizes in a couple of weeks and it's going to be a big deal. It's the same thing. I mean, putting the analogies together. I mean, you got to keep up with it. Anything, you did all the hard work. You hopefully went to XWP for assistance. They helped you. They got your site in a good spot. If you don't maintain it and you go back to your old ways, then why'd you get help in the first place? You got to keep up with it.
Well, Caitlyn, some of us needed that ice cream to get through 2020. So.
Oh, I mean, I do. Trust me.
So we've had a really good discussion about like where kind of these changes came from and where we're at now with performance measurement and the importance of performance. Just as kind of a closing for everything, I want to see from each one of you where you kind of see performance going in the future, because there are just I think it's May. Hi, Reed from the future here. I just wanted to pop in and say that we actually recorded this about 2 weeks before Google came out and stated that the changes would actually be coming in June of 2021 instead of May. The full rollout won't actually be coming until August of 2021. So a little bit of a miscommunication there, but that's what editing is for. I think it's May. There are big changes coming for search and how performance is actually going to start playing a bigger role in page ranking and Google search. Where do we see, Core Web Vitals and performance as a whole in a year, 5 years, 10 years down the line?
So layman's terms for me, it's hopefully more business, more projects to manage. But I mean, as Mike had mentioned kind of before, you're having more regions come in with maybe slower internet speeds. I mean, it's just going to continue to be an ever-present problem. Especially like right now, we are seeing an influx of performance projects because of the big change happening in May. Not every site's doing that. They're kind of waiting around, seeing what might happen. Well, I think it's not going to be a flip of a switch. I mean, it takes time to see changes, but I think once these changes do come into effect in May and time passes, more companies and more websites are going to see that their performance is an issue. And so the need to fix is going to increase. And that's just my personal point of view. I mean, obviously Mike and Piotr, please share your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I'm very glad that Google is adding Web Vitals to the ranking as a ranking factor, because that will force the site owners to build more user-centric websites. So the website should be, in theory, faster and more pleasant to browse. That will also force changes in the ads itself. The ads are one of the biggest negative factors on the site performance. So I think the ad publishers will optimize the ads so they are not so heavy. And regarding the Web Vitals, we already know that Google are working on slide because on some changes, and they are, as I mentioned, they are considering adding the first content pane to the Web Vital, and they are considering also to lower the first input delay from 100 milliseconds to 75 or even 50. I think they will add changes. They are also considering measuring the responsiveness of the website by measuring the smoothness of the scrolling. And that's also, I think, a good change, because right now, even if user can enter the site and not interact with it, so not click anything, but just scroll down. And right now, the Core Web Vitals are not measuring how smooth the scroll experience is, but we know that if you are loading a lot of ads, the scroll is junky. So the Google is considering measuring also this, and the smoothness of the animations. So we need to take account these changes and think about them right now, how we can fix them.
And that's one thing we didn't even really touch on too much, is that idea of all of this really being for the user, right? We're not making a faster website just because we're not making it, ads more optimized just because. All of this comes down to the user. And I think that really should be and is a whole conversation just in and of itself, right? That the performance aspect and these measurements of, whether or not you can scroll immediately, whether or not you can click on something, how quickly that click responds, how much content actually loads and how fast it loads. All of it comes down to a user's experience on the website. And that's a good point, that those will become more important, and they should become more important as time goes on.
I have a very different view of how the internet will look like in a couple of years now. For one, I feel the ads are not getting worse. There is a direct business improvement for the ad systems and the ad techs to have ads that load quickly. They load quick enough, they get the reviews. They load slowly, you get that little Chrome stuff where we removed this ad because it was taking up too many resources. So doing a bad work as an ad provider will just swoop you off the market sooner rather than later. I was delighted that a lot of times when we discover some things, as we were doing our fine-tooth comb analysis, were discovered, and that feedback was provided to the ad providers. 9 times out of 10, they took in the feedback well. They said if there was something that they were not aware of, that they will put it on the roadmap. And we've seen countless and countless repeats on some suggestions coming out of us working on a project ended up improving the ads for everyone. So on the other hand, there is a different force in the dark that is growing and growing. And these guys don't have a business incentive into behaving better. And by these guys, I'm putting it on the third parties embeds. We work in such a well-connected world that, I don't know, adding a tweet, adding some Facebook embeds, placing a YouTube video on your website is part of the regular behavior. And even though we've flagged not only once that things are in a phenomenally bad shape, it's not possible that a single like button should take 1 megabyte of JavaScript. It's bonkers to just imagine, that's a teeny weeny thing on the site. And you add, there was a popular method when you had like a tweet button, a like button, and LinkedIn and others. And each one was adding hundreds of kilobytes of JavaScript. For what? And they are not doing a good job. I believe they're getting in a worse and worse situation where adding a single embed on your website can have phenomenally bad impact to your website. And until they get to feel that people will put us in a corner and we're not going to use us because we're just the only ones doing 255 characters messages. Okay, how do you explain you showing 3 megabytes of JavaScript for each of those 255 characters? It's not nice. So the ads are not the problem right now, and I don't see how quickly these embeds are going to behave better.
Well, and maybe it's going to come down to that pressure, right? Because ads weren't always that way. Ads weren't always, let's make the best experience, right? Let's slim down as much as we can so we can load as fast as we can, and everybody wins that way. It took pressure from engineers. It took pressure from the companies that are using the ad tech right? To say this is what we want. And like you said, the companies that didn't provide that kind of fell out of the way. The companies that did provide those quick load times are the ones that are succeeding. And maybe the embeds don't really have as much of that pressure, but as time goes on, maybe it will just come down to the education of the user, the education of the entire community, and that this does have an impact. Because yeah, maybe one like button isn't going to make a huge impact, but you were saying, you know, you can have a tweet button, a like button, a LinkedIn button, a Pinterest button, and all. And that's just your social media random buttons, not to mention everything else you can do with your page. The education of people as a whole on performance and how much those little things can add up is gonna help that, hopefully, right? That's the goal, I guess.
It's definitely hard because the social media, it's such a more like it's much more like monopolized than, you know, an ad provider in my eyes. And from a marketing standpoint, I'm not removing my like button. I'm not removing my LinkedIn, my Instagram, because nowadays all your marketing, most of it is word of mouth and sharing and liking. So like in my opinion, I think that's definitely going to be a harder battle. I mean, it'll get there. I mean, it always does, but I think that's definitely a harder fight right now. I mean, and when we go to a client, we're like, well, you know, your embeds are causing issues. If there's none other option, like to reduce the impact, they're never going to come back at this point and say, cool, let's just remove our like button. Let's just remove our LinkedIn. It's one of those things right now. And that's why we're talking about pressure. Something needs to happen because it's, I don't know if like monopolize is the right word, but these social media companies know that these websites are not removing their icons. They're not, like, at this point, they're not going to do it. And if they're not going to do it and no one's pressuring them, why spend the time to fix it? And that's like what we need. I don't know who we is, but that's what we need to fix is, you know, making that change, because as a marketer, I'm not removing my word of mouth icons, essentially. That's what's hard.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, just hopefully like it will happen, right? Mm-hmm. But it's when, and yeah, the education aspect, I think, and that's what we're trying to do a lot at XWP too, is education about performance. And I think a shift for Core Web Vitals in search, I think a lot of people, I mean, I didn't know any of this existed until I started working at XWP a year ago. I think a lot of people didn't know this existed until 2 months ago when everybody started posting blogs about it. Like, hey, these 3 scores are going to start impacting your search ranking. And they go, wait, what are these 3 scores? What are these numbers? I had no idea this was here. And it's the more awareness there is behind it and the more education we have on what the scores mean, what impacts the scores, I think it'll all eventually things will be great. Eventually, sometime.
With the like buttons and everything, there is alternative ways of supporting them, because they support being placed in an email. So of course you can run them without the heavy JavaScript. It's just not everyone knows about that feature. And with regards to the embeds, there has been a force happening on the web that's controversial, but also moves the needle forward, and that is AMP. In order to penetrate the AMP market, the embeds had to play nice and abide by a certain amount of standards to get in, and knock, I want to show up on those pages too. So keeping them out of a good portion of the internet has made some of these provide alternatives to embed in a certain fashion. Now, this puts the right type of pressure and at least makes them aware, but they hasn't cascaded to the extent of, hey, let's make those embeds that we can place on AMP show up outside in a similar fashion. That's still not there yet, and maybe we will at some point before we get the next big change in the web. I'm being hopeful here.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for having this discussion. It was great to talk about performance. And I think with our first episode on UX, we got through the discussion and we realized that this was probably supposed to be like a 24-hour long discussion about a single topic. And I think the performance is the same way. You know, we barely scratched the surface of what performance itself is and page speed and the impact that all this can have. So hopefully we can have you all on again soon and we can talk more about the user side of things or the AMP side of things and kind of the way that the future is moving toward performance. So thank you all for joining us and hope to have you on again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks. And of course, thanks again to you, our viewer and listener, for joining us. We hope you learned a lot about performance and core web vitals. See you next time on Tech XPress.